And isn't it weird how you can give someone else advice, and if you looked at someone else and they had your situation, you'd be like, it's a no-brainer on what you should do. You need to do X, Y, and Z. But when it's your own situation, you get almost tunnel vision, or you get, almost like the fog of war, and it's really tough to have a fresh perspective. So that's why it's so good talking to people on the outside who have that fresh perspective and who can tell you with a bit more clarity on what to do.
I firmly believe that most people, they really know what they should do. A lot of the times, success, whether it's in the job search, whether it's in entrepreneurship, whether it's in anything, it is simple. You do certain things and you get the returns. People conflate simple with easy though. A lot of the time, very simple things are unbelievably difficult. If you can do simple things and do the difficult tasks to get those simple things done, then you can have success. This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is powered by Z by HP, HP's high compute, workstation grade line of products and solutions. Today, I had the pleasure of interviewing Greg Kamradt. Greg has been in and around data science and analytics his entire career. He's seen it from the corporate side as a director of strategy and growth at Salesforce, then as the first business hire at Digits, a Series-C FinTech company. This year, he's been focused on teaching thousands of developers and founders how to get started building with AI. He runs Data Independent, a YouTube channel with tutorials and interviews on the AI space. I actually found Greg through his amazing content on LangChain. In this video, we talk about the best advice Greg ever got around his career, why he thinks LangChain is so special for building AI tools and products, and how he sees an explosion of AI products changing the world. I really enjoyed this conversation with Greg, and I know you will too. Greg, thank you so much for coming on the Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast.
Ken, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, no problem. So I came across your content when I was doing some research on LangChain, and you have a really awesome entire, essentially video playlist about learning it and some implementations. And I was like, you know what? I want to talk to this guy. One, because I want to learn about LangChain. Two, because I think he'd have an interesting story. And we got to talking. I was like, wow, we have to have this guy come in because you're not just a technical practitioner. You have a lot more nuance to your career and a lot of really cool background that I think the guests would really enjoy learning from and getting to experience firsthand. So again, thank you for coming on. I can't wait to dive in to you and your story.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been a journey. I've been in and out of data for most of my career, so I'm excited to see to talk about it more.
Amazing. So a kicking off point I like to start with all of my guests is where you first got interested in data. And not everyone follows data careers, but a lot of us are. It's integrated with what we're doing now. Was there a pivotal moment, or was there a slow progression over time into data?
Yeah. It's a good question. I would say that there's kind of two pivotal moments. My first role out of school. So I'm a fresh out of undergrad. Very green in the workplace. And I started my career off in corporate FP&A. And that means I was doing finance and budgets for big corporations in their departments, right? I remember getting an Excel spreadsheet. This was back before Google Drive or links or anything like that. So it was just a big, massive, dirty, unversion controlled spreadsheet. And there was a list of transactions throughout the entire page, and call it something like 100,000 transactions or whatever. More rows than I could count, more columns than I could see. And my boss was basically like, Greg, you tell us X, Y, Z. Like, I forget what the question was, but they were like, go figure out the answer within this spreadsheet. And I found that I had a knack for digging into Excel spreadsheets and extracting an answer. Now, that may sound a little silly, but if you think about most data out there, it's in tabular form. So that was planting the seeds for me to jump into data analysis early in my career. Now, that was pivotal moment number one. Number two was around 2015. I found a PDF, and it was Intro to Data Science for Programmers. And in that PDF, which was basically like an old school tutorial, it taught you how to implement a recommendation system from scratch. Now, nothing fancy here, but with elementary Python, implement a recommendation system. And I didn't know Python beforehand. So I was learning Python for the first time and what recommenders were at the same time. And I remember that my mind was just blown with how cool this stuff was. I was like, oh my goodness, you can extract recommendations from simple code and simple math that wasn't confusing. And so I did all the exercises in that PDF. And that was a huge kind of turning point in my career because I went further down the data science track after that.
So from that point, how do you go from just picking it up and learning these basic things into a career associated with this field? What are the sort of proximate steps there that you took?
Sure. So, like I said, I started my career off in finance, and so I considered myself a finance person, right? Um, However, once I found that PDF, I enrolled in one of the first data science boot camps back in 2015. So the concept of a boot camp was well known. There was web development, there was mobile, there was all that stuff. But from what I can tell, there's this company called Zipfian, and Zipfian was the first data science boot camp. And so there wasn't a huge data science practice, at least in the professional sense. Um, of course, there's academic and there's some very nuanced places, but not in the product growth or user analytics type of sense. And so I took that boot camp in April 2015, and Python was the main data analysis language in there. So I went from a finance guy with a business background to picking up elementary Python. Now, by no means anything production grade, but I was starting to get pretty good with the Jupyter Notebook and Pandas. Is my point. And then after that program, which was 3 months full time, um, 3 months full time, I landed a job at Salesforce, which, um, I mean, to say that program changed my career is an understatement, because not only was I getting paid more than double what I was getting paid in finance, all of a sudden I was working at Salesforce and all the access to all the amazing people within that group. And then the Salesforce name helped me out. And then not only that, but then learning on the job and just surrounding myself with product analytics was just a huge turning point for me.
Something I think is really cool about that whole approach, like from boot camp to getting into Salesforce, is that it seems like each step sort of lended itself to the next one. So the first one, you found this PDF, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, wow, this is super interesting. I'm diving in. I know I'm interested in data. I'm going to go extend this fascination or this opportunity that I see here through a boot camp, right? It's not that, oh, I think this field's cool. I'm just going to go take this boot camp and spend money and spend 3 months of my time. You got the initial hook because you started doing the work. You started becoming fascinated with it. It sort of opened your brain to, oh, there's more here. Maybe it's inefficient if I learn this myself at the time rather than going through a more orchestrated system. And sort of that initial hook where you were willing to do the work snowballed into you actually doing the work, learning, landing this awesome job, and being able to do more of that in that position. It's just sort of this momentum effect that takes place. And I think so many people, they fall on the other side of that, where they realize, oh, data science has a lot of upside. It's a good career. I want to go do it. And then they don't look and evaluate if they like it to begin with. They just start diving in, whether it's paying money for boot camp, for master's degree, whatever it might be. And I feel like there's a lot of burnout in the field, unfortunately, but because of the other side of that phenomenon. Fortunately, my story is very similar, is that I was building models. I wanted to predict fantasy sports. I realized that there was a lapse in my technical ability where I was running up against a wall. How do I actually build a model that's not a linear regression? What does it mean? How do I aggregate all this data? I need more technical skills to do this, but I'm using Excel, Google Sheets, very elementary R. I'm going to go back and learn this to accelerate everything from an organized platform. But for better, for worse, the videos you're creating on YouTube, there's more opportunity for learning those things in the wild than there was in 2015. I know that for sure firsthand.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And funny story about fantasy sports too, because I'm as well pretty into fantasy sports. And I was just learning Python back when I was playing Yahoo Fantasy Football before they had transaction notifications, right? I think this was like 2018. You didn't know if your teammate or your league mate made a transaction, like they dropped a player or picked one up. And so I implemented my own homegrown transaction monitor. And I thought to myself, I could do this just for my league, but I'm going to do this for everybody. And so I built the app, put it on Reddit, and overnight, I think I had like 400 people using my app, right? Which isn't that much in practice, but for somebody who doesn't know how to code, putting up this app and getting all of the league data and all the transactions and sending out a ton of emails about different occurrences was pretty cool and pretty exciting. But to your point, that's the beautiful thing is once you learn a little bit of code and you can start to build your own tools, that is a huge stepping stone within someone's career, because then you're not limited. You're only limited by your imagination after that. So all the productivity you want, all the automations that you want are at your fingertips once you learn this skill set. And it's interesting to think with the AI trend, and we'll jump into this in a second here, but with the AI trend, how high is that barrier to entry for people making their own tools? Um, Still TBD, and we're gonna figure it out.
Well, I think it's dramatically reducing without a doubt. For example, I just had a call this morning with one of my friends catching up. He was talking about a Bitcoin crypto trading bot that he was building.
Yeah,
And he doesn't know how to code. Maybe very, very elementary. He's an awesome video director.
sure.
But he showed me the code. He's like, I wrote this in Pine, which is like I think one of the trade platform languages. I had no clue how to use it. And he's like, oh, I'll just like turn it into Python code using ChatGPT so you can understand it. And to me, that barrier to entry reducing is so cool for anyone who's got that entrepreneurial mindset or philosophy, because it frees up so much. You could, the ability to build is something I would love to be able to democratize. Imagine if everyone who had awesome ideas that could create value in the world were able to execute on those things. I mean, the world would be maybe a scary place, but also a very exciting place as well.
Yeah, that's exactly it. I think the tide would rise for what value means, relative value, at least, because once you have an influx of a supply of tools, which is really cool, the everyone's expectations will be higher as well.
Yeah. So I want to get more into your career, but before we do that, I have a question. I think it's like sort of opportune at the time.
Yeah.
Talking about the fantasy football application you shared on Reddit. I hope it's okay if I mention this, but you also have another business kind of in the art space as well. You're making YouTube videos, and we were talking a little bit about sponsorships and those types of things before. By nature, you seem like unbelievably entrepreneurial. I really like that. It seems like you're like, hey, how can I scale this? How do I share this? How do I do those things? Where does that come from?
I think it comes from, I saw a quote from Andrew Wilkinson that said something along the lines of like, a successful person is just a walking anxiety trait used for productivity, or something like that. Or basically, I think it comes from two things. One is a genuine curiosity for how things work. But then two, I grew up in Silicon Valley. And with that, you have a lot of success stories that you grow up around you, whether it's your friends, whether it's your friends' parents. And so I think that the crowd, not the crowd, but the kind of the atmosphere that I grew up in as well has always been one where you try things and you're building things and you're sharing things. And then the minute you get hooked into that world and you jump into the entrepreneurial social media type of space, the number one thing people say, you want to build in public. You want to build anything. You just want to ship it out. So I think that it was early on just growing up in the Bay, and then eventually it just started to snowball and go from there. Now, it may look cool from the outside too. And I think I have a lot of small kind of mini hobby projects that have gone well. And I'm looking for like bigger projects that will be career defining as well. But I tell you what, it's a big, long journey, and we're having fun along the way.
I love that you have so many of these projects that you're sharing. That's the biggest thing to me, is that if you build something completely in private and you don't share with anyone, there's very little return unless it's, some trading bot or something like that.
Yeah.
But if you're sharing it, you get input, you get feedback, you can rapidly improve it, make it better, scale it. And to me, that's something that's missing. I in one of the podcasts I did last week, the guy was talking about how he's making a forever project, right? Where he's just working on this, and that's no different than a company, like a forever project that you share in industry, or when you're trying to get a job. Like the line between a personal project and starting a company, to me, is so blurry, especially with these new tools. That like, why not? I love that concept that like, hey, like I was doing this because I loved it. Holy crap, I can make some money from this. like the money comes from advertisers. It doesn't
Mhm.
come um, from people that are, for example, like watching videos or any of those types of things. Like, holy cow, like win-win. I mean, there's so many opportunities out there, and I love that you're capitalizing on them by doing that building in public philosophy or action set.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I think it's pretty well agreed upon that you want to find what you're passionate about. You want to build on top of that, and you want to be able to turn your energy into a job, right? Everyone knows it. It's a clear roadmap. Yes. However, I found that one of the hardest things in my own life is to identify what I have energy for, AKA like what's your passion, and what you like. Even passion is kind of a hype word right now in the first place, but finding something you have energy for is extremely underrated because I think Paul Graham said it. It's like, get users first. We can worry about how to monetize later. There's a million ways to monetize. It's kind of like when you're thinking about projects and careers and things you want to work on, it's find whatever it is you have energy for. Don't worry, we'll be able to monetize it later. And um, the other thing I like to say is um, knowing how to do something is pretty straightforward because there's a lot of playbooks out there. There's a lot of experts. There's a lot of advice. Knowing what to do and what you're excited about, that's the really hard part that folks usually have a hard time for. And this,
Yeah.
even going further, sometimes people would say, Greg, I want to start a blog, right? And I say, yeah, sounds good, no problem. Just know that blog post number 3 or 4 or 5 isn't going to be the hard part. Blog post 50, 55, 60, 70, that's when it starts to get hard because it's easy to have a spurt of energy for something. But once you need to grind and you need to have endurance, that's a whole different ballpark.
I love that so much. I mean, there's so many people, just like the blog post example on YouTube, they say you haven't even started YouTube till you've made your 100th video, right? That's when you
Yeah.
start getting the hang of it. That's when you start realizing, oh, who is my audience? How do I serve them better? Do I even enjoy this? Can I do this for this long? And is it sustainable? There's so many factors in that. And I also loved, I think, so Cal Newport has this whole thing about not following your passions and
Mhm.
following your aptitude.
Mhm.
I don't personally agree with that.
Yeah.
I think that there is some hybrid of aptitude and passion, right? If you're good at something, you're more likely to continue to do it and get
Mhm.
excited about it.
Yeah.
But the initial spark of doing it, it inherently, I think, has to be there. And it has to, like you can feed a spark with aptitude, the spark of passion with aptitude. And that's where the magic starts to happen. I also think there's like uh, there is a path that people can follow.
Mhm.
It's sort of amorphous, but finding what to do has always been difficult for a lot of people. But for me, I feel like I've inverted that equation and it's become very easy.
Mhm.
Is that I essentially just follow the edge of what makes me excited but also uncomfortable, like thinking about the upside or the opportunity or the work associated with it.
Mhm.
And that's a pretty fine line. If it's like way too uncomfortable, you're like, this is completely unrealistic, probably not along the path. If it's too easy, if it's like, oh, this isn't going to hold my attention, probably not worth it. But if it's right on that thin line where, man, this is a big challenge, but holy cow,
Mhm.
I'm excited about this. And if I could have, if you think about all the upside potential in terms of value, like opportunities, all these types of things, but it's scary because there's a lot to do. There's repercussions. What are people going to think? I've either tricked my brain into being like, that's what I need to do,
Uh-huh.
or there's something fundamentally broken in me that I'm not too upset about either way. So
Sure. Do you think you honed in on that feeling after you found success as a creator, or do you think that you had that feeling even early on before any of the view counts, any of the audience was there?
I think I've always had that. I mean, I had that when I was trying to pursue, for example, professional golf. When
Mhm.
I was in before I was working in industry, that's all I wanted to do was play professional sports.
Mhm.
And to me, that's clear, very similar thing. It's like, wow, this is so challenging. A lot of people, it sucks because at the low levels, you're grinding, and just to make it, it's is it worth the struggle? But the reward, the upside of being able to accomplish that is so high. But situations do inevitably change, right? We're
Yeah.
not playing with the same data the whole time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I had access to more information
Mm-hmm.
about my personal ability as well as uh, about the market, and it's like, wow, like if I spend 5 years doing this, in a best case scenario, what happens? In a worst case scenario, what happens? In like
Mm-hmm.
a median scenario, what happens?
Mm-hmm.
There's inherently like a rational part of that equation as well. And for
Sure.
golf, it was like, this is, long term, uh, probably not the best. I mean, I still work in professional golf,
Mm-hmm.
and I see the lifestyle that players live, where they're traveling 30 weeks of the year. They're living out of planes. There's a lot of,
Totally.
they're very nice planes,
Yeah. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like, would I want to do that lifestyle compared to, like probabilistically, like if the two options I have are like, maybe like three options are: one, I'm like still kicking it around on the mini tours, not making any money, not a good
Mm-hmm.
option, probably highest percentage, let's say it's 50% chance.
Mm-hmm.
Let's say uh like another 45% chance I'm like middle of the road, playing on like developmental tours, making enough money to get by but still not really comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
Or best chance 5%, which is probably way too high over a 5 year time horizon, but I'm gonna kudos myself because
Sure.
I could ball a little bit.
Uh-huh.
um like best chance, it's probably closer to like 0.1%, but we're just gonna say
Sure.
5%.
Sure.
The best chance is I'm making a lot of money, but I'm traveling constantly, and I can't have a lot of the quality of life things that I would really enjoy. Like, the expected value of that entire scenario is just like overall not very good. Whereas if I do what I do now, like I make on average like significantly more money than the average professional golfer.
Mm-hmm.
I have a lot more time freedom. I don't have to travel. I can travel when I want. I get all these benefits. And like the aggregate scenario for me working in a domain that I do is significantly higher. That was a little bit of a tangent, but I mean, there's like the analytical side, and then the um, that sort of, I guess, like feel around where I am with the risk and the reward um, and the difficulty that I think really is a good driver. This episode of Ken's Nearest Neighbors is brought to you by Z by HP, HP's high compute workstation grade line of products and solutions. Z is specifically made for high performance data science solutions, and I personally use the ZBook Studio and the Z Workstation. I really love that the Z Workstations can come standard with Linux or WSL2, and they can be configured with the Data Science Software Stack Manager. With the Software Stack Manager, you can get right to the work of doing data science on day one without the overhead of having to completely reconfigure your new machine. Now back to our show. So let's dive back. I really want to get into your experience at Salesforce, your
Nice.
experience sort of branching some of these things off. You had such an important conversation with one of your managers,
Yeah.
if I remember correctly, and I'd love to learn more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So I entered in at Salesforce as a senior analyst on what was called then the product data science team. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying basically a growth analyst on the product analytics team. And we would partner with different products in Salesforce. So we were like an internal consulting firm. And the way that we would grow is that we would provide value to our partners. So I was partnered with Sales and Service Cloud. And if we did a good job for Sales and Service Cloud, we could make the justification, hey, we are doing one headcount's worth of value right now. If you want us to do more, because there's always more, there's always PMs, there's always features and everything, fund our team with more headcount and we can do more for you. And that was kind of how we grew as an internal consulting firm. And when I first joined, like I said, I was a senior analyst, and usually data people, they have a choice to make when they get further in their career. They can go deeper down the technical route, or they can go towards the managerial route, which can still be technical, but not nearly as much. And because of my business background, I chose to go down the managerial track. And so then I started to move into the manager position where I was managing analysts, but then also data engineers, data scientists, some visualization people, and some strategy people. And I left Salesforce on the same team, still on the strategy and growth team. But as I was leaving Salesforce, and this was to go kind of take a personal sabbatical, so that was my impetus for coming out. And I tried, or even backing up from there, I asked the question, "Hey, if I'm about to leave corporate, what do I want my last 60 days to look like? Right? Who do I want to talk to? What benefits do I want to take advantage of right now? Or like, how do I just want to optimize this time? Because once you leave and your email's closed off, you're out of the club. You're not with them anymore, right? So I set up a bunch of one-on-ones with a whole bunch of people, a lot of people that I respected, to kind of say my goodbyes. And one of my mentors there, I won't say who, I was having my closing one-on-one with her, and she said, "Hey, Greg, I think that you should shoot to be more than the data person." And I was kind of taken aback. I was kind of taken back by that statement. And I said, "What do you mean? Why?" She goes, "Well, data, the data that you're doing right now, you're advising the decision maker. You're not the decision maker on these things." And I thought to myself, man, yeah, that's true, because I would advise finance on the recommendation on what action I think they should do, or the action I think marketing should do, or the GM or the product people. And as always, my advice or recommendation, I was never the one actually making the proper decision. And so from that point in my career, I thought to myself, okay, I need to kind of steer myself more away from that position, because it wasn't necessarily one I wanted to go deeper down, and something more towards on the decision making side. And uh, this is always another huge question, which we could have an entire podcast on, is when you're a data analyst, what are the career options in front of you? And what are the different routes that you can go and explore? And so I asked myself that question many times. And the route that I found myself naturally drawn to was an operations track. So heading towards the COO realm. And if you think about why, it's like, well, COO, they see internal processes and they need to speed them up. They need to make them efficient, right? They see a lot of data. Sometimes product rolls into finance, into the COO. Sometimes finance rolls into there. And there's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of efficiencies, and there's a lot of making sure that tools and orchestration is working internally within a company. And so after I left Salesforce and I was looking for my next job, I knew I wanted to go to the startup route. And so I joined Digits as their first business hire, which is a fintech company. And I told the founders from early on, it's like, hey, here's what I did at Salesforce. Here's what I'm going to crush for you in the beginning. I have no doubt about that. But I'm going to steer my career in this direction. And this is the position I want to grow into, which is much more on the operations side. And the founders were down for that. So it ended up being a good fit for me.
There's so much great stuff in that. I mean, starting from the end or maybe working forward, I love that you kind of told them what you were looking for. Something that so many people fall into, right, is that they say, hey, I just want a new role. I just want to work at XYZ company. They don't put thought into what they want to make out of that opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you really think about it, telling an employer what you expect and what you would like to get out of a role and where you would like to go, it helps them do a better job at keeping you happy. It helps them do a better job of giving you projects that you're excited about. It's legitimately a win-win, especially after you've already landed a job.
Yeah.
And I think that that's so overlooked by so many people. I am also interested in, if you're comfortable talking about it, can you talk about why you took the sabbatical off? Like, what were some of the things you were thinking, like, hey, this is a good idea.
Yeah.
I want to take time. And what was the reasoning behind that?
It was, I was in a grind at Salesforce too. And it had nothing to do with Salesforce as the company per se, but it was a corporate environment. And I saw that my learning curve, what the next, call it 5 to 6 years, looked like in that single role, in that single position, wasn't exactly what I wanted to continue on doing. Now, I had a few options in front of me. I could go try to find another position within Salesforce, or I could take some time off and kind of live the romantic life of going and traveling and going from there. But I chose the latter with my then girlfriend, now wife at the time. We ended up going and living in Bali for a little bit, and I worked on a bunch of projects, basically from what we were talking about earlier. The last thing that I'll say too is just general advice or tip that I learned is there was a period of time at Salesforce when my immediate manager went to another position. So I was reporting into my manager's manager, right? And when I first started there, I thought to myself, man, this is going to be really cool. I'm going to get really awesome exposure to who is then the SVP, right? However, the type of management that SVPs do is not the type of management that I needed in my position. They're very strategic, very, long-term thinking. And at that point in my career, I needed a bit more day-to-day types of help. And so it ended up not being a great situation for me, and it added a bit more friction to it. so that was another reason why the impetus to leave as well.
No, I mean, I think that makes sense. I also think that if you think about how you got in, like this is such a great opportunity. It's completely transformed your career.
Mm-hmm.
It was great to work then, but there are things about that role that maybe weren't the best fit for what you wanted long term. I mean, like the ability to be a decision maker
Mm-hmm.
in Salesforce, the barrier to entry to do that is probably a lot higher than at a startup. Also, the overhead associated with that. I mean, startups, you can have tremendous impact as a decision maker. At Salesforce, maybe you can, but there's so many checks and balances that those decisions sort of get watered down over time compared to what you might feel at a smaller company.
Yeah,
And
I was going
I
to say that. I was going to say the thing that just to tack onto that is we talk about expected value of it too. That's the other side of the coin. The expected value of me becoming a decision maker at Salesforce is pretty high if you just follow down the track, right? What you're talking about with the startup realm, yes, you can become a decision maker quicker, but your expected value of success is so much lower that it's a complete different side of the coin.
Yeah. Well, I think that all plays into individual risk appetite too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that from talking to you, I would like to think I'm this way as well, but there's an interest in taking like calculated small risks to see what the upside is.
Mm-hmm.
And in the scope of a career, I think a lot of people also don't realize that taking a new job isn't as big a risk as a lot of people think, especially if you already have established career.
Mm-hmm.
You're at a good company, going to work for a startup. If it didn't work out, you could go maybe even work back at Salesforce again.
Yeah.
You could go work somewhere else. There's exit opportunities once you've established a proof of work, once you've gotten a certain skill set, maybe for interviewing down,
Mm-hmm.
that really frees you up because there's so much fear around, like, what if XYZ happens? I mean, expected value, yes, but if you factor in the remarketability of yourself into that expected value, that does actually change the risk equation.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And in fact, I got my startup job via a cold email to the founder, which is like a 4-line cold email, which, the other big lesson within my career that I've seen is around storytelling, right? And it's amazing the power of storytelling and copywriting and what it can do for you. So you're right you're right when you say that the name of Salesforce also helped me out a ton.
You mind if I ask roughly what was in that email?
Yeah. So I was leaning back on the Salesforce name, and I'll tell you. I'll tell you right now because this is a good one. Yeah. So I emailed one of the founders, and I said, "Founder, my name is Greg, and I was previously director of strategy and growth at Salesforce, leading our sales and service analytics teams. Congratulations on the recent funding for Digits. I want to help accelerate your growth. Do you mind if I send you my resume and bullet points to see if it's a good fit?" And so the reason
Concise,
it was
elegant.
just nice and short. The resume, sure, because that's just standard. But then I said, do you want me to put bullet points? Because no exec wants to read a resume. I mean, really, they want the TLDR. And and then he didn't even respond to the first one. I had to follow up with him again. And he was like, okay, yeah, let's see let's see what you got. And so I sent it over to him, and that started the conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I think the first thing, let's dissect that a little bit. I mean, the first thing you led with was a proof of work.
Yeah.
Essentially.
Accolades, basically.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is what I've done. This is what I could do for you,
Mm-hmm.
is a very compelling argument structure. And I think that's easier to do than a lot of people realize. If you built a cool personal project that's relevant to a domain, you can say, hey, I built this dashboard. Like, it's something I've done. Check it out.
Yeah.
And if you like it, let's talk about how I could do something like that for your company. I really love how short and concise. I mean, it's to the CEO. You have to be respectful of their time.
Yeah.
You have to have some mystery in those types of things. And uh, I wish there was more examples of really good ways to connect just like that.
Yeah. Right after I left Zipfian, I did a video about my job searching process and how I landed at Salesforce. And the number one lesson throughout that entire thing is don't apply through the front door. Careers.uber.com, careers.lyft.com. That's you're sending your resume into an abyss there. I put all of my energy into cold emails to recruiters and hiring managers. I got more responses and more hit rates from that than 200 applications into random career pages. It's just that is just not the way it works. Oh yeah, same goes for LinkedIn. Don't apply on LinkedIn. It just does not work at all.
Yeah, I completely agree, especially early in the career, right? If you don't
Oh yeah,
have
sure.
necessarily the
Yeah,
track
yeah.
record. One of my good friends, he's actually out in Hawaii right now,
Nice.
Jeff Lee. He collected data on his entire job search.
Mm-hmm.
And so he found early in his career 100% cold email outreach, like different channels where the competition was lower.
Yep.
100% has a significantly better return. We're talking like 100% better outcomes.
Yep.
But when he was later in his career, after he worked a couple data science jobs, he found that the traditional routes, he was actually having success because if you're thinking about mid-level data scientists, how many are actually out there compared to junior level data scientists?
Sure.
The total market applying for these roles is significantly lower because there just aren't that many people that have the amount of experience in a domain that's still relatively new. I mean,
Sure.
like I feel like I've been in this domain for a long time, and I started in 2015, just like you.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if we're applying for jobs, how many other people are also in the market with that amount of experience also applying? It's a pretty interesting paradigm. But at the same time, he was finding that he was now having roughly equal success with those two. If you're thinking about the job market, which I think is a min-max equation, right? So your goal is not to be the 80th percentile candidate in every role. Your job or goal is to be the best candidate in some roles and maybe even the worst candidate in some roles, right? Like if you're the best candidate in 3 and the very worst candidate in the other 30, you're probably going to get a job.
Yeah.
Right. And how do you do that? Probably something that's personalized or outreach or that isn't what everyone else is doing is going to give you disproportionate returns.
Yeah. I mean, that type of job hunting is just like a sales funnel. And coming from a growth background, if you break it down just like a funnel, you can see exactly where your problems are. So if somebody tells me they have a hard time getting a job, I just start at the top of the funnel. I say, how's your outbound? What do you mean? What do you mean? What outbound? All right, well, there you go. There's the problem, And then it's like, okay, what's your response rate on your outbound? Oh, it's 1%. Okay, well, I think that could be a little bit higher. And you just go down. It's like, how many phone calls have you had with a recruiter? How many have you had with a hiring manager? How many have, second round, blah, blah, blah. And then you can really just diagnose where the problem is. And I would say that most folks, they have a volume problem at the top of the funnel. They're not doing enough outbound. And then it's also a conversion problem on that outbound. So their sales pitch or their email or their online persona is not curated enough that recruiters are rejecting them before they even reply.
That is one of the most valuable things I think anyone listening who's looking for a job can evaluate is collect data on this process. Figure out, just like any other analysis you do, figure out where the bottleneck is, figure out where it's failing. Yeah. I mean, you have people that are sending out 1,000 resumes or applying to 1,000 jobs and not having any success. Well, it's not the outbound.
Yeah.
What part of the process is breaking down? You're not getting emails back. Well, fix your resume.
Yeah.
Fix your outreach. Go through different channels. There's very rarely ever in that process something that isn't actionable that you could be doing better. And a lot of the times people defer to, I'm just going to send more out. I'm going to increase the volume because that's the easiest thing to do. Once you get in the groove of sending out resumes, you're like, I have something to show for it.
Yeah.
But sitting down and saying, okay, my resume isn't good for these reasons. I need to improve this. I'm going to get feedback from 4 of my friends, from a data scientist I know to make this more compelling. That's hard.
Yeah.
That's difficult in comparison, but it has, again, disproportionate returns associated with that.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And on that point where you said people fall back on what's easy for them. I was on the My First Million podcast, Sam Parr said a line that was just, it hit me a lot. He goes, people are looking for excuses as to why something didn't work out for them or something like that. I don't know what it is. They're looking for permission to not put an energy into something. And so if you only do what's easy for you and you don't do what's hard or what's differentiated, you're not going to end up getting what you want in the first place.
That is such a good line.
Yeah.
I think it falls into this overarching concept. I firmly believe that most people, they really know what they should do.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of the times, success, whether it's in the job search, whether it's in entrepreneurship, whether it's in anything, it is simple.
Mm-hmm.
You do certain things and you get the returns.
Mm-hmm.
People conflate simple with easy, though. A lot of the time, very simple things are unbelievably difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that is overlooked constantly. If you can do simple things and do the difficult tasks to get those simple things done,
Mm-hmm.
then you can have success.
Yeah.
But the easy things don't always lead to the proportionate return, or they do give proportionate return. Like easy sure. things, small return.
And isn't it weird how you can give someone else advice, and if you looked at someone else and they had your situation, you'd be like, it's a no-brainer on what you should do. You need to do X, Y, and Z. But when it's your own situation, you get almost tunnel vision, or you get, almost like the fog of war. And it's really tough to have a fresh perspective. So that's why it's so good talking to people on the outside who have that fresh perspective and who can tell you with a bit more clarity on what to do.
Yeah, that's something I 100% fall into that trap.
Yeah,
without a doubt.
Yes,
that is something that I face almost on a daily basis. I think outside looking in
mm-hmm.
is really powerful.
Mm-hmm.
I also think that people that you're closest to, your inner circle, those are the people that are supposed to be telling you, hey, you could be doing this so much better.
Yeah.
You could be maximizing and you're not doing the hard, simple things.
Yeah.
I have two friends that hold me accountable like that directly, and I don't know what I would do without them. Because people who are too far out, they don't want to like mess up your stuff.
Sure.
They're usually hesitant to be too critical, unless they're random commenters on YouTube or TikTok or something like that.
Yeah.
Switching topics to YouTube and TikTok,
mm-hmm.
Or more just YouTube.
Yeah.
So, obviously I was introduced to you through LangChain.
Mm-hmm.
How did you get so excited about that technology? What is it about that technology that is so compelling for you?
Yeah. So back at Digits, like I said, I moved my career over to the operations track. And what that entailed was figuring out mini automations like in work, right? So how do you hook up Zapier to do this? How do you get the analytics engine to start working or whatever? And you combine that with my Python skill set that I learned early on in my career. Building tools is just fun, right? It's just so cool to build something and then see it work for you, right? And so that was baked into me. And I had an earlier experience teaching people how to do data analysis on YouTube. So I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, I started a YouTube channel called Data Independent, and I just made pandas tutorials, right? So what I did was I had the top 60 pandas functions by Google search, the volume of search per month, checking Ahrefs or SEMrush or whatever. And I just started at the top. And I went all the way down, and I just did a blog post, a video, a code sample. Well, those 3 for each one of those different functions. And there's 60 of them. So I pounded one out per day for 2 months, and I was trying to do the SEO play, right? I put it on autopilot for like 2 years. SEO went up. It was great. A couple sponsors, not bad. Flash forward to January of this year, January 2023. And I see on Hacker News the launch post for LangChain. And I've later talked to Harrison and told him that was very influential for me. He goes, we didn't even post that. Somebody else posted that. All right, whatever. But either way, I saw it in January because the first PR for LangChain was in October of 22. And when I saw that, as you know, Hacker News can be kind of grumpy sometimes with new technologies, and they kind of rag on new technologies. And the comment section was like really into LangChain. And I was like, I still have no idea what this thing is. I go to the documentation. It's tough to figure it out. I'm not so sure. I look on YouTube. There's no tutorials on LangChain. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this is so cool, right? And I had tried experimenting with the OpenAI API itself, and I was running into all the problems that LangChain had solved. So the problem of chunking, the problem of connecting to other data sources, just XYZ, all that stuff. And I thought to myself, man, this framework is really, really cool. And I want to learn how to do it. And so I think one of my first either tweets or videos was, I'm going on a journey to learn how to build really cool, impactful AI applications. Come along with me on this journey if you want to learn with me, basically. And so I ended up doing a whole bunch of content for it. And it's been a really fun journey since then. Now, connecting it back to what we talked about earlier in the podcast, sharing in public, I never really considered myself a content person, right? Until this year. And it's been unreal. It's been surreal. I mean, the amount of inbound opportunities has been awesome. The amount of meeting cool people who are interested in the AI space has just been really cool. And I'm just so thankful for the opportunities that have been presented. And it, and I'm not stopping. Like it's just been way too fun. So now, as long as I can sustain myself financially with this journey, we're going to keep on doing good stuff.
Amazing. Well, I really must say, I think you do have a gift for teaching. I've went through quite a few of your LangChain tutorials. I think minimum 7 or 8 of them. And they've
Nice.
been unbelievably helpful because when I was going through, I just recently built an app where I hopefully obsolete myself
Mm-hmm.
from having to answer YouTube comments.
Oh
But
yeah,
we'll find out.
yeah.
But what I found was that honestly, the LangChain documentation, it's very clean and it's very nice, but it didn't. It has massive gaps in explaining certain concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going through your videos, I was going through some of the basic workbooks you had, and you quite eloquently described a lot of the core functionality, which I think is sort of overlooked. I had to go to the JavaScript documentation, interpret it, and then bring that to Python for a lot of some of the small nuts
Mm-hmm.
and bolts of things. And that to me, being able to view your stuff in combination with that, they also have a chatbot that's built into the documentation that was only sort of
Yeah,
helpful.
yeah.
I would have thought that would have been a lot better based on
Yeah,
the,
totally.
the technology.
I was going to say, I tell you what, I think part of the reason why that's the case is because, I told you my background earlier. I'm not technical by trade, right? I'm not a software engineer. And I tell people all the time, I'm not going to be your production grade engineer to get you to, you know, 99.99 uptime, right? My background and my passion is in B2B products and delivering value to customers. So if I'm going to teach a technical topic, I need it to be dead simple. Like I need it to speak like English. So some of my code, you'll see it right too, is not the most optimized. It's going to be slow, but it's going to be so simple that you can understand and kind of read it like a book. Because if I don't have it that simple, then I don't understand it either. So I think that that's another differentiator that people resonate with content wise.
I think that's really important. Something that I've learned from teaching as a professor on the internet and doing stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that is that you need to have empathy with the students. And a lot of college professors, or particularly computer science professors I've had, they have no semblance of the thought process of any of their students. They're
Yeah.
completely detached. They've been in academia their entire lives. They learned these concepts 25 years ago, and it's second nature to them. And when you're learning a new tool, whether it's the beginning of programming or anything,
Mm-hmm.
a teacher being able to resonate with that journey is something that can go a really long way. And that's something that I'm even realizing now is, oh my goodness, I'm like kind of detached from the very beginner data science questions that I used to have.
Mm-hmm.
Putting myself back in my shoes of, oh, why would I even do this? Why would I read in a file this way? Why would
Yeah.
I make a pivot table or do something very
Yeah.
basic for me now? I don't even think about it. But fortunately, YouTube comments give me feedback
Yeah.
and
Exactly.
Kamradt and Kaggle and those types of things. But it's really important for teachers to be able to have that ability to relate And it's cool that your business background sort of ties in directly to that.
Yeah. And every creator too, they have a choice about what type of audience member do they want to serve. And so I've strategically not gone to the here's how you install Anaconda, here's how you install Python. I let other creators and other people do that stuff. It's once you open a Jupyter notebook, let's go. Game on. We're gonna have some fun and go from there.
Yeah, I think there is beauty in niching down and specialization in content. I
Mhm.
mean, for the tutorial videos, for the maybe not the how to walk through an analysis, but how to install things, how to configure things. There's going to be people that are going to do it better than both of us.
Yeah,
Probably
totally.
both of us
Absolutely.
combined, right? But for actually walking through those things, you can really make a massive impact right there. And I've seen it. I've been able to build some pretty cool stuff, very, very much because of your digital help.
Nice.
Um, I think something that would be useful, and we talked
Mhm.
a lot about LangChain. Could you just describe what it is? Because for a lot of
Sure.
people, hearing about it, there still might be a barrier to entry because they're like, oh, it sounds confusing, which it kind of is, but it conceptually is not.
Sure. So let me do it at a few different levels of abstraction. Um, Lang, let me put this. LangChain is to what Pandas is to doing data analysis. LangChain is to helping build AI applications. Cool. What is LangChain? LangChain is a series of abstractions packaged up in a Python library that makes working with language models easy to do, right? What is LangChain? LangChain is an easy way to develop AI applications. So what it means in English here is basically a lot of the hard parts that you'll run into if you just interact with the OpenAI API, like the raw one itself or any other language model API, you're going to quickly run into a series of problems. First one is going to be context limit. You're going to try to put in a 50-page book into a prompt, and you're going to get an error back from the API that says, "Hey, you tried doing too much here."
Too big.
Right? So yeah, so what do you do? Oh, well, I'm going to split up my document and I'm going to make a for loop and then I'm going to chunk it and then I'm going to try to put it in piece by piece. Well, instead of you doing that yourself with vanilla Python, there's libraries that are specialized in this. And LangChain is one of those. Now, LangChain is open source. That means that you can go and check out the code on GitHub yourself. I frequently need to go into their source code and go check out different parameters or whatever it may be. Um, LangChain was one of the first frameworks out there, and it's super interesting to see some of the LangChain decisions get permeate throughout the industry. So LangChain was one of the first groups to allow you to connect external data sources to a language model, right? And I don't know how many months head start they had on it, but then all of a sudden OpenAI has plugins come around and they mention LangChain in the plugin blog post, launch blog post. Super, super interesting, right? So LangChain is what is LangChain? LangChain is an awesome community of builders that is on the forefront of building with AI. And because it's open sourced, you get a lot of really cool integrations and a lot of really cool abstractions that are on the tip of the spear for building language models.
That's such a good definition. I also think LangChain is very in line with the overarching trends that we're seeing in data science and AI.
Hmm.
So, something that I've observed is that outsourcing models in particular is going to be a massive trend. So, rather than have in house data scientists building a model,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I trained this large language model myself, we're going to be outsourcing a lot of that to third party models, open AI, to Google, whatever it might be. The problem is that those models are not specific to our data. But
Mm-hmm.
for us to retrain one of these large language models, it would be prohibitively expensive. It would be overly complex. And for most of these companies, it's completely privatized. So we would not be able to do that. Llama, it's a
Mm-hmm.
little bit different. But LangChain allows us to essentially use our own data to integrate and chain prompts together to
Mm-hmm.
make all of these models relevant for our specific use cases. And
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's the direction where I see a lot of this stuff going is most companies don't have the firepower to train these massive models. And if all of these models are becoming multimodal and having so many things that you could do with them, you're just going to need one or two models to do everything and you build infrastructure around that. And LangChain is that infrastructure that allows us to build and make these things into actual products like you described. And I mean, I see so much upside. I mean, I don't know if LangChain is necessarily going to be what does it. There might be
Mhm.
another framework that does something very similar that is more widely adopted or whatever it might be.
Mhm.
But I there's been very few packages where I've seen the immediate utility in how to create products rather than projects right out of the gate. I mean,
Yeah,
you got me really excited and riled up talking about this now.
totally. Yeah, absolutely. And I I like dissecting. Like why did LangChain rise so quickly to the top, right? I think I mean this may be a bit of an overstatement, but like the vibe on Twitter with people sharing their projects is absolutely massive. And not only that, LangChain isn't some like project in the background where it's like some back-end service that doesn't make any sense to anybody. You can show your LangChain project to your grandmother, right? You can show it to your mom, you can show it to your brother or whoever it may be. And it could potentially immediately provide value to that person. So I think that LangChain rose so quickly because people were making impactful demos. That's it, impactful demos on Twitter that shared really well and went viral extremely quickly. So like there was a time when it was novel and extremely cool to connect a PDF to ChatGPT, right? Like today it's like, oh, no big deal. Everybody and their mother's doing that. But there was a time when that was a really big deal, right? People did that for all the different domains and all the different niches. And so all of a sudden, software engineers from finance, from auto, from healthcare, from aviation, from everywhere are wondering, how do I do this for my own data? And so they jumped on the trend, and LangChain was the one that did it for them. There's a lot of other libraries out there that help connect data, like Llama Index, and um, it's super interesting to see how this industry is evolving, both in the open source and the closed source side.
Yeah, I mean, you can even abstract that all the way up to how ChatGPT works. Is that anyone can use ChatGPT? If you can use
Mm-hmm.
Google, if you can type into a box, you can use it. So I
Mm-hmm.
taught, I gave a lecture about sort of the future of AI to a poli sci class the other day, and these none of these people are necessarily like super tech literate compared to a software engineer or something along those
Sure.
lines. And they're saying, okay, if AI is going to be this powerful technology, how do I show my grandma? How do I show my mom how to use this? How do where do they start with this technology?
Mm-hmm.
And the beauty of these technologies, at least with ChatGPT and in some sense LangChain, is you can start with the technology itself. You can just open a web page and show someone ChatGPT and say, hey, you can type into it and it'll respond. The intuitiveness of that compared to almost any other technological invention is unparalleled. I mean, you think of an
Yeah.
iPhone. You have to learn how to use a smartphone. You have to understand the haptics. You have to do all these things. You for the internet, same thing. You have to
Mm-hmm.
understand how to open a web browser. You have to do all these things. This innovation is more accessible than any large scale innovation maybe in history, and it's very
Yeah.
very exciting.
Yeah. I think that's the reason why they went to 100 million so quickly.
Yeah. Um, so you talked about the actual technology. Let's get into nuts and bolts. What are some of the ways you could see LangChain in tandem with some of these large models creating
Mhm.
value, in terms of products, in terms of opportunities? Do you have specific examples? If there's secret sauce that, you don't
Yeah,
have to spill that, but I know you have a bunch of
sure.
tutorials where you're doing actual use cases.
Yeah. I mean, so let's just talk about a few big buckets here. So one of the big buckets that I personally like, I'm not sure why, but is around transcripts and spoken word, right? So I made a project where I would analyze sales calls with a language model, and I would extract information that was relevant to the salesperson. What are the next steps? What are the follow-ups? What are the pain points of the customer, right? Et cetera, et cetera. Huge, massive there. I'm knee deep in podcast work right now as well. So doing topic extraction from podcasts. And so one of my partners, they have 400 podcasts on their series there, and there's a bunch of business ideas and life advice and product recommendations and quotes that are just sitting on that podcast in unstructured form, and they're not taking advantage of it, right? So to be able to extract that information and get it ready for the content engine, so go and make shorts, go and make ads or whatever it may be. I mean, clear use case extracting that stuff. Um, uh, another huge one that I love personally is around idea generation. So if I have a goal and I want to do something, the language model doesn't have my internal bias when I'm trying to figure out ways that I can do something, right? So I often tell the model, hey, can you give me 10 ideas to complete this goal? And 8 of them are no good. I mean, they're gibberish, right? One of them isn't bad, but the last one really inspires some energy in me to go and do something, right? And then all of a sudden I get like little butterflies and I think, oh yeah, this is such a cool idea. I want to go ahead and do this one. Really, really powerful there. But then the part that I've saved for last here is where everybody's talking about it, is truly on the decision making side. So on the using a language model as a reasoning engine, which still blows my mind that that's the case. So we saw the early demos of like an auto GPT or a baby AGI, which blew everybody away. But then there's a little bit of mismanaged expectations because they're not as valuable as they may want them to be in its current state today. I have no doubt that they will be eventually. It's really cool to see the browser automation work that's happening with companies like Multion and with companies like Adept. Though I'm still waiting. I would love to see what Adept is up to recently because I haven't heard much from them. So I think browser automation is a huge, huge one. And then the other piece that gets me really excited is around thinking about how big companies like Salesforce, Intuit, Amazon, Microsoft, Google's, how are they going to use language models internally? And what does their own internal plugin architecture look like? Right. And who's managing those internal plugins? And is that a new class of developer? Because that's kind of like what I forget the fellow's name, but he put out that blog post around the AI engineer. That's the new job title that's going to be coming around. Those people are going to be managing internal plugins for B2B operations as well, which I think is going to be super, super cool. But then not only that, the last thing I'll say here is I started noticing on Twitter that a lot of people were forcing Chat GPT for interesting use cases. So people on Twitter would say, oh, I use Chat GPT for therapy, or I use it to generate bedtime stories for my kid, or I use it for argument formation. Like I'm about to present something to my boss and I want to know what questions he may have so I can better my argument or whatever. And so I collected all those ideas and I have a Notion doc of like 100 different ideas of people using ChatGPT for super interesting use cases out in the wild. And right now, I think the limit for doing more is really around reliability because these things aren't as deterministic as we need, and people's imagination with it too. I The last thing I'll finish up with is I don't think that the limiting factor on more tech progress with LLMs is GPT-4's reasoning ability. I think that it is fine for right now, but we are extremely immature on the superstructures that interact with GPT-4, and that there's a lot of room to go there. So even if GPT-4 had stayed at the exact same reasoning ability that it is today, you give us another 5 years, the world is completely different, even with GPT-4. We don't need GPT-5, 6, 7, 8 quite yet.
Yeah, I tend to agree with you wholeheartedly. I think that the immaturity in the infrastructure is something that will, I mean, that's going to change relatively fast.
Mm-hmm.
And I see the writing on the wall of how much good infrastructure means for creating products and value and
Mm-hmm.
opportunity. I'm seeing it in my own life. Just using LangChain a little bit, I've been able to create something that I already know will create value for myself and for anyone who's watching, for example, my videos. And so it's like, wow, I mean, if I can do that in a weekend, what can someone with a lot more motivation and firepower do to impact and scale to significantly more people? And also, Ken's Nearest Neighbors podcast, always always happy to be an early alpha tester for any topic modeling you do in the podcast space. So,
Yeah. Well,
by
I
all
tell you what,
means.
I'm making the script. I'm making the script right now. The biggest pain in the butt with this entire thing is just data processing, getting the files, making sure they're organized, and setting up the structure itself. The language model part's the easy part. So
Yeah.
let's chat later, and we'll try it out.
Heck yeah. So those are all the questions I had. Something that I would love to hear is if you have any advice for people who are interested in learning more about LangChain, interested in maybe more of a future uh, as a decision maker as
Mhm.
well on the way out. And then what's the best way people can learn more and hear from you?
Nice. Well, let's take those three just one by one there. If you want to get started with LangChain, literally made two videos to answer that exact question. So video number one is just the LangChain 7 core use cases. Now that is just, I'm sorry, I think 7 core concepts. That one is just like the 7 ways that people are interacting with language models. It's the 7 abstractions that you're going to want to know the most. I would watch that first. There's a corresponding code notebook that's open source. You can go grab it, run it all on your own. The second video is the LangChain 9 use cases. So you learn the nuts and bolts, but then what do you do with them? Well, you do summarizing, you do question and answering, you do extraction and tagging and all that, et cetera, et cetera. Go watch that next. After those 2 videos, you're going to be very well prepared with the nuts and bolts to go make your own project, which is really step 3. Go pick something that interests you. Go connect one of your own documents. Go build a question and answer bot and go have some fun. And then put it on Twitter and share publicly, right? That's the way I would recommend that people get started with LangChain. Now, the second question around how do you become more on the decision maker side of the house, it's really being intentional about your career. Because if you're not in a decision making standpoint right now and you want to be, well, that means that you're going to have to make a shift in your career. And the best way that you can do that is through intentionality and looking at people who are a few years ahead of you and figuring out, who do I want to be like? And whose career do I want to go and model after and figure out how to get from A to B? And if you're like, well, I really don't know where to start, it may be trite, but go ask ChatGPT. This is my current career. This is where I want to go. What are 10 ways that I can go and do it? And like I said, 8 of those ways are going to be bogus, but 2 of them are going to maybe get you excited and make you start to go do it.
Yeah. But before you get into the
Yeah.
last one, I think something that's a little bit funny is the intentionality. It goes hand in hand with decision making, right?
Yeah.
If you want to be a decision maker, you have to make decisions about your career and you have to think about them and actually act on them. So it's sort of, in some sense, a self-fulfilling prophecy
Yeah.
in a unique way.
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. And then lastly, if you want to get a hold of me, my Twitter DMs are open. That's where I respond to a whole bunch of people. That's a great spot. If not, you can go on my regular website, which is contact@dataindependent.com. Or lastly, throw up a YouTube comment, but I don't respond to all of them depending on the question from there. But either way, I love talking to folks. And if somebody gives me a well-formulated question, I generally respond. If you throw me your Python bug in a YouTube comment and you say, why isn't this working? I generally won't respond.
Rules of thumb: if you want to get a hold of him via cold email, make sure you do your homework because he's pretty good at them too. So, Greg, I will put all of the links you described in the description to the video and also in the show notes so people can find you more easily. This
Beautiful.
was awesome. Thank you so much for coming on. I loved the conversation and I learned a lot.
Awesome, Ken. Thank you very much, man.